You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in the second trailer for The Flash. And we've got a special treat for you. Later in the video, we are going to be joined by Colton Ogburn, who just saw The Flash at CinemaCon. He is going to give us a spoiler-free, raw first impression of the movie, which, judging by this trailer, looks pretty great. But the stakes are pretty high for this one, because if this movie's bad, if it flops, then this would be pretty much the end of the DCEU as we know it, and James Gunn might be forced to do a total and complete reboot. So let's break this baby down. Now there are going to be several shots and sequences that we talked about in our last breakdown video. So in this one, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Flashpoint comic book to give you some context for the trailer. You just reread the comic? Yep, just reread the comic. So the trailer opens with the two Barrys arriving at Wayne Manor. The two Barrys? I'll explain later. Now, this is the same Wayne Manor in Batman '89 and Batman Returns. The movie is confirmed to take place 30 years after Batman Returns, as Michael Keaton narrates.
I lost my parents.
And he says this as he touches a photo of his family. Now, the channel heavy spoilers pointed out that this is the entrance to the Batcave, which means that every time he entered the Batcave, he had to touch or look at this photo of his parents. This reminds him of why he fights, kind of like the signs that football coaches put above the doors of their locker rooms. Then we see his old Bat computer, where Bruce worked out the Joker's identity in the first movie.
I have taken off my makeup. Let's see if you can take off yours.
A few cool details here: the schematic of the Batwing, the Batmobile, and of his suit, and this really dated video playback software that looks like Windows Media Player or QuickTime 1. Remember, this is the same software that he used to work out that Jack Napier was really the Joker. And then the Batwing descends from a hole above the cave, kind of like it was hanging upside down, like a sleeping bat, symbolizing that Batman has been out of action for a while, but now he's going to return. Again, the waterfall in the Batcave is not something that we saw in the Burton Batman films. It's more similar to the waterfall the Nolan Batmobile drove through. See, I think this is part of the Batcave that we haven't seen before. This is probably a cliff face overlooking the sea, kind of like how in Batman the Animated Series, Wayne Manor was on the seaside.
Batman is by the seaside. He looks at the ocean and thinks of his dead parents.
Anyways, I'm betting the Batwing flies out of this waterfall. Notice the two Barrys watching from the background as it slowly lowers down.
What do you mean, two Barrys?
Okay, so let me explain a little bit of the Flashpoint comic and what I think is happening here. So, in the comic book Flashpoint, Barry wakes up one day and finds that the world is completely different. There's no Superman, no Green Lantern, no Justice League, and he doesn't even have his powers. And also, his mom is still alive. As we saw in both versions of the Justice League movie, Barry's dad is in jail for killing his mom when Barry was little. But of course, Barry is still out looking for the real killer. So then Barry, in the comic, goes to find Batman, and it turns out that in this new universe, Batman is Thomas Wayne, and his son Bruce was the one who died in the alley that night. Thomas is a much more brutal Batman who kills criminals and generally doesn't care about the world. And we see that reflected in this trailer. Bruce has long hair, which is one of a couple of callbacks to the comic book The Dark Knight Returns. That comic showed a retired Bruce Wayne in his 50s who had a mustache, and when he comes out of retirement, the mustache is shaved. The Nolan films did this in Dark Knight Rises with Bruce Wayne's wispy little goatee here. So I think we're seeing here that our Barry goes back in time to save his mom, but then changing an event in the past basically changes the entire universe. Not exactly a butterfly effect, it's more like it totally changes the fabric of the universe and things just occur in different ways. Batman is now much older and there's no Superman or other heroes and no Justice League. Or maybe Barry just ends up in a different universe altogether and we'll see some multiversal travel like we did in the CW Arrowverse shows. In the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event, Grant Gustin's Barry Allen did meet Ezra Miller's version of The Flash.
Is this cosplay? Oh, do you want a selfie, bro?
No,
I'm sorry.
Now, I have some other theories on this that'll connect to Flashpoint that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And of course, don't forget that soon we're going to hear about the movie from someone who's actually seen it. No spoilers reaction coming up in just a little bit. So we see the same closet of bat suits that we saw in the previous trailer, containing lots of bat gadgets on the wall and 7 bat suits from Bruce's adventures following Batman Returns. In the front, this is the suit that Bruce wears in the rest of this movie. Then, from left to right, we have the bat suit with the gun. Batman famously hates guns, but he did use them in his earlier Golden Age adventures, so who knows, maybe in this universe he was going through a slightly darker period. Costume designer Chris Weston confirmed in a tweet that this suit is using the Bat logo from the 1960s Adam West series.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Speaking of Adam West, the next suit is blue and gray, much more like the Adam West suits, and what we see Batfleck wearing later in the trailer. This is the classic 89 suit where Keaton couldn't turn his head or hear anything his fellow cast members were saying. This is the suit from Batman Returns, which had a more armored look instead of like rubber abs. This one could be an armored bat suit like the the one in Kingdom Come, or it could simply be an underwater scuba suit. Probably a little bit of both. And finally, this one looks like it's inspired by the Nightmare bat suit with the goggles, but Jay Yaws over on BatmanNews.com thinks it's supposed to be an Arctic bat suit. Either way, Keaton had a lot of adventures before hanging up the cape and cowl. He's probably despondent because the world is still just as crappy as it was when he started, and he's asking himself, what was this all for? But now, Barry comes into his life, and he was actually able to save his loved ones.
You actually did it.
So, in the comic Flashpoint, Thomas Wayne Batman is 100% behind Barry's quest to restore reality because it would bring his son Bruce back to life. So throughout the comic, Barry thinks that this reality changing was the work of his archenemy, Professor Zoom, aka Eobard Thawne. Now, Eobard Thawne is a speedster from the future who hates the Flash, and he was the person who originally traveled back in time to kill Barry's mom and changed reality to begin with. Now, in Flashpoint, Barry assumed that Professor Zoom was the one who changed reality, until Thawne revealed that it was Barry's fault all along.
What?
So I think we're kind of going to be seeing a similar origin for Professor Zoom in this movie. So when Barry travels back in time, he saves his mom. And he would have learned this was possible because in Justice League, he time travels when he enters the Speed Force. You remember the greatest cinematic moment of all time, according to an Oscar poll that definitely had no robots voting in it.
Do a lot of people not know if they're robots?
So anyways, Barry changes the past and he travels back to the present and he finds that he has broken reality. He meets this new version of himself who has no powers. Or maybe he actually thinks he's in some alternate reality. So Barry and his other self seek out the smartest man alive, Batman. Notice how the other Barry is also wearing yellow all the time, like Professor Zoom.
Coincidence? I think not!
Even in the flashbacks, our Barry has a blue tint, like the color of the Speed Force and his lightning, while the other Barry is always tinted yellow. I think this is hinting that the other Barry is going to be Professor Zoom, but I'll explain how a little later in the video. And just a reminder, we're going to hear from Colton Ogburn in just a bit with his review of what this movie is actually like. In the flashbacks, we see a recast of Barry's dad, now played by Ron Livingston from Office Space.
That's on the worst day of my life.
What about today? Is today the worst day of your life?
Yeah.
Wow, that's messed up.
And there's this shot of Barry watching his younger self run from the house when his mom was murdered. In the Flashpoint comic, Barry slowly regains his memories from this alternate reality. So we could be seeing a similar memory collision right here. So then we see Barry arriving during Zod's attack in Man of Steel. Now, I don't think this is actually like when he first appears in this reality. This is probably much later in the movie when all is lost. Remember, in Man of Steel, Zod first broadcast a message to Earth.
You are not alone.
And then he met the military in the desert so he could take Superman away, and then he used these world engines to begin terraforming the Earth. Now we do see Zod in the desert here in the same place where the government handed over Superman, but in this movie, there is no Superman. Now in the comic book Flashpoint, which is an alternate reality, Superman's rocket landed in Metropolis, killing 30,000 people. So the government locked him away in an underground bunker away from the sun under a red sun lamp that robbed him of his powers. So in the comics, Superman grew up skinny and unpowered, like me. So Zod is this incredibly powerful force that is going to destroy the world, and all because of Barry. In the comic, there's something similar to this. The world is going to be destroyed by a war between the Amazons and the Atlanteans. I guess without Superman around, everybody just turned into a giant D-bag. Here we see a hospital collapsing in Metropolis, and it's named in honor of Martha Wayne, Bruce's mom. This is not just an Easter egg though, it's a reminder of dead moms, and tells us why Barry is doing all of this to begin with. And then we see Barry on the roof of Wayne Manor watching Supergirl fly away. So in this world, maybe Superman's rocket totally missed the Earth. Instead, this is likely Kara Zor-El, his cousin, and she was actually hinted at in Man of Steel. When Clark recovers the Kryptonian ship, one of the pods is empty, and this was always meant to be her, according to Zack Snyder. But it looks like instead she's being held by the Russians, judging by the print on her prison shirt that we saw in the last trailer. And like Superman in the comic, she is also being kept away from the sun, so she remains depowered. So in the comic, Cyborg deduces the location of Superman and they bust him out of jail. And I think we're seeing the same thing play out here, but instead with Bruce using his ancient QuickTime 1 computer to work out where Supergirl is being held. She says,
"Do you know what this symbol stands for?"
Means hope, right?
And this is another callback to the Man of Steel, when Kal-El clarified that his house sigil meant...
It's not an S. On my world, it means hope.
This was also repeated really, really poorly by Joss Whedon in the Justice League.
But it looks like an S.
Yes, it's meant to. It's meant to wind. Like a...
Next, we see Supergirl flying over the Batwing, and man, my inner child just went nuts at this. Like, I had the Batwing toy as a kid, I always play with my Batman 89 toys along with my other action figures, and I dreamed of seeing like Michael Keaton and Christopher Reeves work together in the same movie. I mean, this is awesome. And speaking of nostalgia...
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Now, this is, of course, an Easter egg to Batman 89.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on! Let's get nuts.
But notice he's also wearing a more heavy-duty bat suit with these giant gauntlets, more similar to the gauntlets that he wears in The Dark Knight Returns when he's getting ready to fight Superman. The suit that Bruce Wayne wore in Batman vs. Superman was modeled exactly after this suit from Dark Knight Returns. And it makes sense. After all, Keaton Batman is getting ready to fight some Kryptonians. And then he flicks a switch, which might be an attempt to give the other Barry powers. In the Flashpoint comic, he actually straps Barry to an electric chair on the roof of Wayne Manor during a lightning storm, trying to replicate the accident that gave Barry his abilities, but instead, Barry gets massive third-degree burns, but eventually they try it again and it works. Later in the trailer, we do see Barry getting shocked in a chair, and also Supergirl carrying him up through the clouds during a thunderstorm. Maybe the first attempt fails like in the comic, but then she flies him into the thundercloud to complete the transformation. After an awesome shot of the three heroes on the battlefield with Zod, we get a few quick action shots. The Batwing flying into a Russian prison. And I gotta say, this concept of a super person being in Soviet Russia is a lot like the comic book Red Sun, where Superman landed in Russia and was raised by the Soviets. It's a really good read and fun alternate history. We see Barry surrounded by the Speed Force, looking at childhood photos. This might be when he goes back to save his mom's life. And then he's saying goodbye to his mother, maybe after he sets the universe right. But then we shift back to what's probably the beginning of the movie, where he is seeking advice from Ben Affleck's Batman.
These scars we have make us who we are.
Now it's interesting because here he's talking about the loss of their parents and how that shaped the heroes they would become. But in a larger way, he is talking about the universe itself. Change one thing about your past and who you are, and the world around you totally changes. Bruce is also standing in front of a comic book shop or maybe a newsstand. Notice there are comic books in the window here and the Daily Planet neon sign in the window. And then we see some shots of Affleck in action, probably from early in the movie. He's wearing the classic gray and blue suit from the comics, maybe indicating that after Superman returns in this universe, he kind of lets up on the constant murder and torture thing. We then see the Flying Fox, that's the big ship from the Justice League. You remember, the ship that was sad and Cyborg had to convince to fly.
They wanted to fly. Flight is its nature.
Really curious to hear from Colton if he thinks that this was a good send-off for Ben Affleck's Batman, who's probably not going to appear in any more DC movies after this. Then there's more action shots, Supergirl cracking Zod's suit in the face. Remember, the Kryptonians needed these suits to breathe in Earth's atmosphere until they became acclimated to the different air. And then we see Keaton Batman with his cape out to stop bullets. This is likely in the tunnels underneath the Russian prison, and you notice you can see the three others cowering here behind him. Then we see the Affleck bat cycle and Barry running up the walls of a collapsing building. This is probably in Metropolis as Zod is attacking and probably about to win. The Kryptonian attacks the Batwing, similar to how they brought down a jet in Man of Steel. And the Batwing, man, it always crashes. And then we run through the symbols of the heroes in the movie. Keaton, Batfleck, Supergirl, finally ending on the Flash. And we end with this button of Batman jumping out of the Batwing without a parachute.
You're strapped to your parachutes.
Hey, where's yours?
Which is very MCU.
Is he wearing a parachute?
No.
And finally, the Batwing is framed by the moon, a callback to this iconic and very silly shot from Batman '89.
Yeah, like what was that about? Was he just like flying up thinking, man, if somebody's in the exact right position, this is gonna look really cool for them?
I don't know, man. So I just want to quickly backtrack to this moment in the trailer.
We're not gonna be able to fix this. No! Nobody dies!
So here's what I think's up with this, and it gets into the secret villain theory. I think that, like in the comic, the world is going to end. Barry 1, our Barry, has to travel back in time to let his mom die. This upsets the Yellow Barry, so they fight, and Yellow Barry becomes a villain, Professor Zoom. This could even be the evil Professor Zoom that traveled back in time to begin with to kill Barry's mom. We do see in previous trailers that Barry number 2 ends up with his own suit. It's actually one of Michael Keaton's bat suits painted to look like a Flash suit, which is actually a joke from the comics when Batman says, well, you can't borrow one of my suits. Anyways, Barry's going to have to end up resetting reality, which is going to change everything for the new James Gunn DCU going forward. Now, in the comics, the changes Barry made to reality allowed for a reboot called the New 52, which was a very controversial story that slightly changed some versions of the characters and actually brought us some of the best DC stories ever told. So now, James Gunn and Peter Safran will be free to choose which parts of the old DCEU they want to keep, who to recast, and which characters they will age up or make younger. I also appreciate that the trailer ends with the comics that the story is based on by Jeff Johns and Andy Kubert. And now, like I promised, we have somebody on the ground at CinemaCon, the first person from Screen Crush to actually see The Flash, Colton Ogburn. How you doing today, Colton?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
You sound tired. How is everything there in Las Vegas?
I am very tired. It's wild.
So, first of all, I don't know what the rules are about what you're allowed to say, Can you do a full review? Just facial expressions. So first, before I start asking you questions, can you tell me exactly what you are able to, even like the outline of what you're able to tell us?
Honestly, to me, it's a little unclear, so I'm just kind of going by what other outlets in our area have been doing. We definitely can't do spoilers, can't do in-depth reviews or anything like that, obviously. And also, just review, like a review going probably like over 5 minutes, just like me kind of going scene by scene or like beat by beat. Even avoiding spoilers would not be okay. But I am allowed to give my reactions, so I'm allowed to do that, so I can react to anything you want to ask me.
Okay, cool. So that's good to know, because as you know on this channel, we rarely talk about plot leaks or spoilers. If you want heavy spoilers, you have to go to a different inferior channel. So Colton, just give us your initial reaction.
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Like I said in my reaction, it's not perfect, but what movie is perfect? It's really fun. It honestly did not feel like a DCEU movie. It felt like something new, something fresh, and it was just so much fun. It didn't drag. It just went, each scene just flew right into the other. It was a lot of fun. Michael Keaton back as Batman was my favorite part of the movie. I assumed it probably would be, and it was. Personally, I think it's his best performance as Batman. It was so great seeing him back. I think him being a seasoned Batman now, just with him being older in the real world, it just really suits the character. Ezra, despite their drama, their issues, I got to be honest, they were great. They carried this movie, not only with our Barry Allen, but the other Barry Allen. The chemistry between those two characters was amazing. They carry the film. The way they bounce off of one another, and knowing that's one actor doing both performances, I thought that was just really, really impressive.
So that being said, you mentioned the two different Barrys. It's because we're kind of dipping our toe in the multiverse. Again, no spoilers, but just from the trailer, that's what it looks like. When Marvel's doing the multiverse saga, and we saw that on the CW shows, are we getting multiverse fatigue? Do you feel like this is kind of like DC's answer to Multiverse of Madness or No Way Home?
Well, I think that this movie is definitely going to get a lot of people saying, oh, DC's just copying Marvel, but we have to remember this movie has been in production for not production, but they've been trying to get this movie made for the better part of a decade with the multiversal plots and stuff like that. So the way I'm trying not to do spoilers, the way they handled it was different from the way the MCU is handling it. And I thought that was really cool that they are differentiating themselves from the way the MCU is doing multiverse and time travel. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say, I mean, they've been pretty clear. James Gunn has said this resets the DC universe and all that. They've said all that publicly. We know it's a multiverse story. We know it's based on Flashpoint. So yes, it gets into all the great multiversal stuff. My jaw hit the floor in a few scenes. It was just like, I can't believe they're doing this. So yes, in a lot of ways, it felt like No Way Home. It felt like Multiverse of Madness in the ways that these studios are doing things with comic book movies that I never thought they would do. And as a comic fan, I'm like, oh my God, they're actually doing this. It's insane.
James, like you said, James Gunn has said many times it's kind of a soft reboot for the DC movies where they're going to keep some things like everything he's made and jettison some things that maybe aren't working, like Black Adam. Do you feel like this was a really strong start to the new DC universe?
I do. Like I said, the movie itself, I really enjoyed. And yeah, James Gunn has came out and he has said this resets the DC universe. So I feel comfortable saying, yes, it does. And the way they handled it, I thought was very interesting. At first, I was like, I don't know if this is going to work before going into the movie. But the way they handled this reset leading into these next his films that he's going to be doing with the DCU. I thought the way that they did that was very impressive. He has come out and said, and many reports have said, We know Ben Affleck is not going to come back as Batman. Michael Keaton and Warner Brothers and James Gunn, all of them have made clear Michael Keaton is not coming back as Batman. But with that being the case, with us knowing Affleck's out, with us knowing Keaton's out, we do know that Gunn is going to have another Batman movie with Brave and the Bold coming. So with seeing The Flash and with knowing what's to come, it makes me very excited for that movie and for the future of the DCU.
Did you feel like this movie was, without a simple yes or no, I guess would work, was it a good swan song for Keaton's Batman and maybe also Affleck's Batman?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I'm really excited. Colton, you're a big fan of Man of Steel. I am not. This movie, from the trailers we see revisits the events of Man of Steel. Do you, in your opinion, and maybe this doesn't count because you're somebody who liked the movie, did it do justice to Man of Steel, or did it maybe make that movie less divisive for people like me? Did you like what they did with Man of Steel's story?
Yes, obviously the trailers, have shown that the events of Man of Steel play into this movie, with Zod being there and all of that. Like we've said in our trailer breakdowns and stuff, we know Barry goes back in time. We know that this is the same situation where Zod came in Man of Steel. Barry says in the trailer, I've created a universe with no metahumans. We know all that, so I'm not spoiling anything. And so that's the situation there. We know there's no Superman. There's Superwoman or Supergirl, which I forget which one it was. But I'm trying not to spoil. As a appreciator of Man of Steel, it was very cool to feel like I walked back into that movie for a second. And I think even people who, like yourself, aren't crazy about Man of Steel, you may feel a little bit of nostalgia just for like maybe someone who doesn't like the Star Wars prequels, but then there's a little prequel mention in the Star Wars sequels. It's like, oh, that's cool. I think that's what you might get with The Flash.
So, did we meet a new Batman? You can't say, can you?
I can't say. I don't want to say yes or no because, that's an answer. But like we just said, we know those other two aren't coming back, and we know another one is coming. And this movie is resetting the universe. So I'll leave it at that. I'm very excited for what's to come.
All right, we'll leave it there. Everything else, I guess, is too spoilery. But Colton, thanks very much for joining us. So if you guys have any questions about the trailer or about the Flash movie, you want to ask Colton or myself, you can at either of us on Twitter, or you can just shout it down in the comments below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Ariel.